I call the Honourable Member Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to take a call on behalf of New Zealand First in relation to both the Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill and the Regulatory Reform Bill and Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill, the two of them that are run conjointly. Mr Speaker, firstly, can I say that New Zealand First supports this bill and, as we always do, support reform that is good for the country. And we believe that this bill does deliver some savings, cost savings in some areas, and some sensible repealing of a number of acts that are no longer applicable. Perhaps people that may be listening out there to Parliament this evening may not have caught up with this because this bill has come back after being in the House a few weeks ago. But in terms of the acts that are being repealed, it is interesting that some of them go right back to 1885. And for instance, the act that I was looking at earlier, which was the District Railways Purchasing Act of 1885, which this bill is proposing to repeal, for instance, refers to, and I quote, "Whereas on the 13th day of October 1884 years, the House of Representatives resolved that the government be requested to come to the best arrangement they can with the district railway companies with a view to the acquisition of the lines by the colony. Such arrangements to be subject to the ratification of Parliament." So that was back in 1884, where this House approved the negotiations with some of the different railway operators to acquire the lines and essentially create the network for the base of the railways in New Zealand. That is a long time ago, Mr Speaker, and is no longer applicable. We've gone through many, many changes over the last 140, 30 odd years. Railways have been bought, railways have been sold, railways have been bought back again, and depending on the government of the day, who knows where they will be in the future. And certainly under the present government, we are never safe when it comes to state assets and where our assets will be and where the nation's assets will be. But in this particular case, we are repealing that old historic act going back to 1885. However, in doing so, we do acknowledge the wisdom of the parliamentarians back there in the 1800s who saw the sense in having the railways acquired through the District Railways Purchasing Act. Similarly, when you look at many of the other acts that are here, some also go back into the 1800s, such as the New Zealand Shipping Company and Powering Act of 1884, and there are others from the 1910s and into the 60s and 70s, many of which are no longer applicable and are basically redundant. So this is good to be bringing this bill to the House in terms of this regulatory reform bill to repeal many of those acts, which basically are sitting on our statute books and no longer have application and therefore basically are clutter. In many cases they are clutter and they simply are sitting there because they haven't been repealed before now. It is good that we are moving on this, and I would commend the Minister. I understand the Minister, the Honourable John Banks, has carried this through from his predecessor, and it's good to see that the ACT Party is working on things such as reforming and reviewing things from the 18th century. They are certainly up with the play, and the fact that the ACT Party is concentrating on looking at acts back in the 1800s is an indication of where they are at. And I'm sure when he has his, when the Honourable Member has his caucus meetings in a phone box somewhere on Lambton Quay, then I'm sure these sort of issues are raised regularly, that they should be looking at acts going back to the 18th century and reforming them. And good on him, and I hope he continues in that vein in the future. Similarly, with the other bill that's before the House tonight, and they're both being actioned in tandem, which is basically to amend 13 other acts, and many of those, again, it's just paperwork, and it's a case of tidying them up. And as with some of the previous speakers, we do support this as well in terms of just tidying up some of the irregularities. And I also was going to mention the Film, Video and Publications Classification Act of 1993, where there are significant savings to be had because of this providing flexibility to either print labels directly or physically affix separately printed labels in terms of films and videos. And this is just bringing things into the modern age of modern techniques. And that saving for the industry is estimated to be in the order of $1.3 million in the first year, rising to $2 million in year 5. And again, that's good. That helps our companies, it helps the various industries involved, and that's a good thing. And New Zealand First certainly supports the likes of that. As it does some of the other, just the pedantics in terms of changing some of the other wording, where they're changing things such as where the Director General, and it refers to the Ministry in the Animal Products Act, and the Ministry under the Agricultural Compounds Act, and some of the other issues where it simply is just a change of wording to tidy it up and make it more applicable in the year 2012. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a sensible move. We have said, New Zealand First, that we will support government policy where it is good policy. We believe in the case of these two reform bills, they are sensible. They will have a positive effect in terms of some savings for different industries, companies, different sectors, also in terms of some of the companies and the friendly societies and credit unions and various other organisations. It does make sense, and Mr. Speaker, can I just say it is, however, disappointing that it has taken so long. And in the case of many of these, perhaps this should have been addressed decades ago, not in the year 2012. And hopefully this House will move in the same direction to amend or repeal other acts that are no longer applicable in 2012 to make New Zealand a much more competitive place. If we are going to compete on the world markets and as a global player, and if we are going to compete with our trading partners around the world, we do have to be competitive in all respects, and regulation is one area which can hamper us and can hold us back. So the more I believe that all members in this House can work towards improving on the legislation that this House provides, and also updating past legislation that may not be to modern day requirements, the better. So New Zealand First will support both of these bills. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Minister Chester Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.